Jimmy's question hung in the air because Robert Redford was no longer listening. His eyes had locked onto a photograph being held in the audience, and in that moment the entire studio held its breath. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studios 6A at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Wednesday night. Late October. The kind of crisp fall evening in New York when the city feels electric with possibility. Robert Redford was the guest. The Robert Redford. Hollywood royalty. Sundance Film Festival founder. The man who defined American cinema for 6 decades. At 87 years old, he rarely did talk shows anymore, but he'd agreed to come promote a documentary about early Hollywood that he'd executive produced. Jimmy was in his element. The interview had been going beautifully, classic film stories, behind-the-scenes anecdotes from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, warm laughter from the audience. The Roots were playing subtle underscore. The cameras were capturing everything perfectly. So in this documentary, Jimmy said, leaning forward with genuine interest, you talk about the golden age of Hollywood and how. Robert Redford stopped listening. His eyes had drifted past Jimmy, past the cameras, toward the audience. His expression changed instantly, the easy smile vanishing, replaced by something Jimmy had never seen on the legendary actor's face before. Shock. Pure, unfiltered shock. Jimmy noticed immediately. Bob? You okay? Redford didn't respond. He was staring at something in the back rows of the audience, his mouth slightly open, his hands gripping the armrests of the guest chair. The audience began to murmur, sensing something was wrong. Questlove looked up from his drums. The camera's operators glanced at each other uncertainly. In the 20th row, slightly to the right, an elderly woman was standing. She was maybe 85, wearing a simple cardigan, her white hair pulled back. And in her trembling hands she held up a framed photograph. Even from the stage, even under the bright studio lights, Robert Redford recognized it. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Jimmy turned to see what Redford was looking at. He saw the elderly woman. Saw the photograph. Saw the way every person in the audience between her and the stage had turned to look at her, creating a wave of attention flowing backward through the crowd. Bob? Jimmy said again, quieter now, genuinely concerned. What's happening? Redford stood up. Slowly. Like a man who'd just seen a ghost. The studio went completely silent. 300 people holding their collective breath. The Roots had stopped playing entirely. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, afraid to break whatever moment was unfolding. That photograph, Redford said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying through the entire studio. Where did you get that photograph? The elderly woman's voice trembled. You gave it to my sister. In 1974. At a café in Santa Monica. You told her to keep it. You told her it would matter someday. Jimmy looked between them, completely lost. This wasn't in the pre-interview. This wasn't planned. This was something else entirely. Redford took a step toward the audience, then stopped, looking back at Jimmy with an expression of such profound emotion that Jimmy felt his own throat tighten. Jimmy, Redford said quietly, I need to, can we stop for a minute? Jimmy didn't hesitate. He stood up, gesturing to his director. Cut. Stop the tape. Everyone stay where you are. The producers in the control room erupted into chaos, but Jimmy ignored them. He'd been hosting this show long enough to know when something real was happening, when television needed to stop being television and become something else. Redford walked down from the stage. Walked through the audience. People moved aside to let him pass, some reaching out to touch his shoulder, most just watching in reverent silence as Hollywood legend made his way to the 20th row. The elderly woman was crying now, still holding up the photograph. As Redford got closer, Jimmy, who had followed him off the stage, microphone forgotten on his desk, could finally see what the picture showed. A young Robert Redford, maybe 30 years old, sitting at an outdoor café table with 2 young women. All 3 were laughing, caught in a moment of genuine joy. The photo was faded, the colors slightly washed out the way photographs from the 1970s always looked, but the happiness in it was unmistakable. Redford stopped in front of the woman. "Your sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah." Her name was Sarah. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She was my twin sister. She passed away 3 months ago. Cancer." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1974. Robert Redford wasn't always the untouchable icon, the man synonymous with American cinema cool. In 1974, he was 38 years old, already famous from Butch Cassidy and The Sting, but still young enough to walk around Los Angeles without causing too much of a scene. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. He'd finished a meeting with the director in Santa Monica and had a few hours before his next obligation. He stopped at a small café on Ocean Avenue, the kind of place that doesn't exist in LA anymore, replaced by chains and luxury retail. He ordered coffee and sat outside, enjoying the California sunshine, reading a script. He was alone, which was rare. No publicist, no agent, no entourage. Just him and the ocean breeze. At the table next to him sat 2 young women, maybe 23 or 24 years old. Identical twins. They were having an animated conversation about something he couldn't help but overhear, about one of them wanting to move to New York to pursue dance, and the other being terrified to let her go. One of the twins, Sarah, had noticed him. Of course she had. Even trying to be incognito, Robert Redford was recognizable. But she didn't approach him, didn't ask for an autograph. She just smiled slightly and went back to her conversation with her sister. Something about that moment, the twins arguing lovingly, the one who'd recognized him but respected his space, the perfect California afternoon, made Redford do something impulsive. He called over the cafe owner, an old man with a Polaroid camera he used to take pictures of regular customers for the wall. "Would you mind taking a photograph?" Redford asked. "Of me and these 2 ladies, if they're willing?" Sarah and her sister, Catherine, had been stunned. Of course they were willing. The cafe owner snapped the photo. They sat at the same table, the 3 of them, and talked for nearly an hour. About dance, about acting, about chasing dreams, about the terror and beauty of letting people you love pursue the things that might take them away from you. Sarah was the one who wanted to move to New York. Catherine was the one terrified to be left behind. When the Polaroid developed, Redford looked at it for a long moment. The 3 of them laughing, caught in genuine connection. He handed it to Sarah. "Keep this," he said, "as a reminder that strangers can become friends in a single afternoon. And that when someone you love wants to chase a dream, you let them. Even if it scares you." He'd signed the back of the photo. "To Sarah and Catherine chase the dream. The fear means it matters." RR 1974. Sarah had moved to New York 2 months later. She'd danced with small companies, taught ballet, built a life. Catherine had stayed in California, gotten married, raised children, built her own life. The twins had remained close despite the distance, talking every week, visiting as often as they could. And Sarah had kept that photograph for 50 years. In every apartment she lived in every dance studio where she taught, that photo had been on her wall. Robert Redford and the 2 twins, frozen in a perfect California afternoon. 3 months ago, Sarah had died. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to death. Catherine had been with her at the end, holding her hand in a New York hospital room. "She wanted you to have this," Sarah had whispered in one of her final conscious moments, gesturing weakly to the photograph on her hospital room windowsill. "If you ever get the chance." She said you'd remember? She said it mattered. Catherine hadn't understood. How would she ever get the chance to give Robert Redford a photograph? It was impossible. A dying woman's fever dream. But then, 3 weeks ago, Catherine had seen that Robert Redford would be on The Tonight Show. She'd called the show's ticket line every single day, and finally, miraculously, won 2 tickets in the lottery. She'd brought her daughter. And she'd brought the photograph. She hadn't planned to stand up. Hadn't planned to hold it up. But when Redford started talking about Golden Age Hollywood, about moments that matter, something had compelled her to stand. To raise the photograph. To hope that somehow, impossibly, he might see it. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Robert Redford stood in the 20th row of the Tonight Show audience, staring at a photograph of himself from 50 years ago, tears running down his weathered face. "She danced," he said quietly. "Sarah." "Did she dance?" Catherine nodded, unable to speak. "Good," Redford whispered. "Good. She was supposed to dance. I'm glad she danced." He took the photograph from Catherine's hands with the gentleness of someone handling something sacred. Turned it over. On the back, faded but still legible, his own handwriting, "Chase the dream. The fear means it matters." "I'd forgotten," Redford said, his voice breaking. "I'd completely forgotten this afternoon. I've given thousands of autographs, taken thousands of photos. But this one." He looked at Catherine. "Your sister remembered. She kept it for 50 years. It was her most treasured possession." Catherine said. "She said you changed her life that day. You told her it was okay to be afraid. That fear meant the dream mattered. She never forgot." Redford looked at the photograph for a long moment. When he looked back up at Catherine, his eyes were red. "May I keep this? Just for tonight?" "You can keep it forever," Catherine said. "That's what Sarah wanted. She wanted you to know that your kindness mattered. That 50 years later, she still remembered. That you changed her life in a single afternoon." The audience was crying. Not scattered tears, collective, overwhelming emotion. Jimmy Fallon, standing a few rows away, had tears streaming down his face and didn't even try to hide them. Redford pulled Catherine into a gentle embrace. Then he turned to her daughter, standing beside her mother, also crying. "What's your name?" "Emma," the young woman said. "Emma, your aunt sounds like she was an extraordinary person." "She was. She taught me to dance. She always said the most important moments in life happen when you least expect them." Redford smiled through his tears. "She was right. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming." Robert Redford walked back toward the stage, still holding the photograph. But instead of returning to his seat, he stopped at Jimmy's desk. Jimmy had made his way back as well, not sure what to do but knowing his job was to help, whatever that meant. "Jimmy," Redford said, "can we do something?" "Anything," Jimmy said immediately. "Whatever you need." Redford held up the photograph. "I want to tell this story. On the air. I want people to know about Sarah. About that afternoon in 1974. About how one conversation, one photograph, can matter for 50 years. "Yes," Jimmy said without hesitation. "Absolutely yes. We'll put it back together. We'll tell the story." But Redford shook his head. "Not just tell it. I want to do something more." He turned to Catherine and Emma, still standing in the audience. "Would you both come up here? Please?" They made their way to the stage, helped by audience members, guided by production assistants who'd materialized to help. They stood beside Redford and Jimmy, both overwhelmed, both crying. Redford took them and sat at Jimmy's desk. For 60 seconds he wrote. The cameras had started rolling again. The producers had decided this was too important to miss. The studio was silent except for the scratch of pen on paper. When Redford finished, he stood and handed the cards to Emma. "These are for you. Words I wish I could have told Sarah. Tell her story. Keep chasing dreams." Emma read them and sobbed. Her mother Catherine held her. Redford turned to the audience. "Sarah kept a photograph for 50 years because one afternoon, someone told her it was okay to be afraid. I want everyone watching to know, the small kindnesses matter. The unexpected moments matter. They echo across decades. Jimmy stepped forward. "We're going to make sure Sarah's story is told. And we're going to make sure this photograph lives forever. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." The studio erupted. Standing ovation. The Roots played softly. Redford embraced Catherine and Emma one more time, then carefully handed the photograph back. "This belongs with your family. But I'll never forget this night." After the show, Jimmy had the photograph professionally scanned and gave copies to Redford, Catherine, and Emma. The original now sits in Emma's home, beside her Aunt Sarah's ballet shoes. And on Robert Redford's desk in his office, there's a framed print. A reminder that kindness echoes. That one afternoon can matter for 50 years. That strangers can become family in a single moment of grace.